What Ronnie had asked me to come talk about is working with API programs or developer programs in the internal environment. So this is really thinking about companies rolling out API programs for internal use. But the spin on it is using those for internal innovation. So rather than looking at this just sort of as an IT project, looking at it as a way to engage across a business and create some innovation, and we'll talk a little bit about what innovation actually means. And so my perspective on this, comes from what my company does, which is consulting and outreach for API providers, technology companies who aren't technology-based, who have APIs and other developer resources. And so what we do is really the non-technical aspect of the developer program. So program strategy, outreach, messaging, that sort of thing. We started off in the wireless space and worked there almost exclusively for 6 or 7 years, and then, really starting 4 or 5 years ago, moving away from that into broader technology, and then now working with a lot of non-technical or non-technological companies, retailers, banks, that sort of thing, who are offering APIs. And most often this involves offering APIs for external developers. But more and more companies obviously are using APIs internally. And again, not just for these IT services projects, but really as a way to try and engender some new business solutions, some new services throughout their company. So let's just talk a little bit about APIs. I mean, we know why we have APIs, right? Any number of reasons, whether this is increasing revenue or getting new leads, spreading content, things like this, or as you can see there in the middle, innovation, which I think is what so many of us, or at least so many of our superiors and bosses are asking us to deliver. But really what I want you to take away from this is that what we're asking about our APIs is really what do we want developers to do with our APIs? Because a developer, an API without any developers using it is kind of a sad thing sitting there. I know Ronnie said that APIs and clients don't have feelings, but I like to think that APIs that don't get used are very sad little creatures, but that's another story. So when we think about an internal API program and trying to work towards some innovation, we want to rephrase that a little bit. And how do we create an API program that creates wins for developers, which in turn creates wins for us, the API provider? This is whether you're in external or internal environment. So I'm going to share 5 sort of baseline tips on some things you can do from a program perspective, as opposed to a technical perspective, which I think Ronnie did a great job of talking through the design. But what was interesting sitting through his talk is, although we're coming at this from different perspectives of technical basis versus more of a business or strategy base, we're talking about a lot of the same things and in a very similar direction. And so I think that's good for both of us. We're both on the right track, I hope. And so like he said, probably the biggest thing, I think he had it as the first step of his design process, is to understand your goals. And again, this could be increasing time to market, or decreasing time to market. Uh-oh. And we're still there. It could be increasing revenues. It could be launching new services. It could be easing data sharing across an organization. But you need to understand what that is before you get started. Otherwise, these APIs that you create are really going to go nowhere. Your program's going to go nowhere. And so the simple way that we look at it is your program goals are going to drive your program design, which means your goals lead into the strategy of how you're going to do what it is you want to achieve, then the activities that you're going to do to try and get there. Taking the kitchen analogy one step further, I swear this is coincidental. We like to think of our developer program mixer here, where you have all of these different elements that could go into your developer program. And I can't sit up here and say for each one of your individual situations and contexts what the right mix of these will be. Again, whether it's an external program, an internal program, the industry you're working in, the technology, and so on, everything's going to have a slightly different mix. And so without having clear goals, it's very difficult to know what that right mix is. So thinking through this in a little more verbose manner, basically, ask yourself, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What do we want to make possible for our developers? And this is where we come back to that innovation. Well, we want people to be innovative. We need to be more innovative as a company. Does anyone really know what that means? No. Okay. See, so what do we mean by innovation? What is it that we really want to do? What is the business problem that we're trying to solve? What are the outcomes? Like I say here, what are the outcomes that would make this program a success? Well, I think by being more innovative, that means we'll launch 5 new products by some date, or we'll launch X new services in new markets. These sorts of things. Like, what are the outcomes that you're trying to get? It's not, we want to have an API program. Great. Love API programs. Do it. But why? What are you trying to achieve? And then, of course, going along with this are the metrics that you're going to use. How will you judge if you're a success? How will you judge if you're actually being more innovative? What does that mean? Without answering these questions, you're really on a hiding to nothing. You're setting yourself up for failure. So just think about those outcomes and exactly what it is that you want to achieve, because without those, you're not really going to get anywhere. So our second point, again, Ronnie touched on this, I think is his second point in his process, was understanding your users. One of the things that we see with internal API programs is far too many of them use this build it and they will come approach. But this is really horrible for internal API programs. You end up with those sad APIs that no one is using. Again, this is particular to your company and its context. Thinking about who is going to use your APIs. Who do you want to use your APIs? Is it a particular function you're trying to enable? Is it a particular group of employees? And then all of those aspects that Ronnie mentioned earlier, technical considerations or otherwise. And then the question too, let's not just stop at who, but why would they want to use our APIs? Again, this speaks back to our program goals. What's that business problem that we're trying to solve? And why would they use an API, one of the APIs, to solve it? There was a good post on LinkedIn sometime recently by a guy named Jeremy Kelleher from News Corp that was 20 lessons on making an API at News Corp. And I thought one of the more interesting ones that he brought up was talking about this user question, saying always have a real end client to target and refactor. And I think he was saying the first API they developed was because they were having a hackathon. I don't know if it was an internal hackathon or an external one, but they were having a hackathon and needed to develop an API for the hackathon participants. And then it sort of grew from there. But the second part of that, the bits of the API that are underused are the ones with no obvious client. So some of this, okay, we're just going to generate an API, throw it out there, see if it sticks. The problem is you may be creating something really cool, but again, if it's not answering a business solution, that's going to be an issue. And then if you don't have any users in mind, in terms of your organization, inside your organization, that also makes it really hard to promote and get anyone excited about it and using it. You're just hoping that you're going to get some magic combination of awareness that they'll know it's there, and then searching for a problem for it to try and solve. So some ways that you can do this. Start early on in your process. You need to involve your users and your potential users from the outset. You actually need to go and speak to them. I know that can be a scary thing sometimes, but having these sorts of formal conversations, or even informal ones, where you're asking people, about what it is that they're trying to do, some ways that they could see being helped. And one thing that we suggest is not framing this as asking people, what do you want? I think anyone who's sort of done requirements gathering knows that that's a pretty bad question to ask without any sort of qualification, and can sort of end up all over the place. So I think if you can start with something, would you use this? Would you use that? Why would you use that? Why would you not use this? Or even what are the problems that you're facing? Because I think a lot of times with internal APIs, the people that you're going to be dealing with aren't necessarily, strict hardcore coders who have a good understanding of what an API is, particularly when we're talking about innovation, if we're trying to draw in a lot of people outside a particular function. So their familiarity with the technology and what's possible isn't going to be the same as yours. So help them down the path a little bit. Having some of these indirect questions and conversations can really help bring things to light, apart from just going, well, what APIs would you like me to make for you? So, show people the way and help them out a bit. And again, I think we tend to draw ourselves into a technology place or a business place, but what we're talking about here really is a balance of both. We're providing technological solutions to business problems. So this isn't a purely technical process. You do need to get your technology right, but the wins are going to come from the business side, from solving those business problems and providing new solutions. And my point here, and be flexible, not to contradict what Ronnie said, but I think really to fit with it, is, as he said, to be continually evaluating that balance you're striking between flexibility and usability. My point here on being flexible is don't make decisions that lock you into a path that eliminate your flexibility, because you're not going to get it right the first time, and you need to be able to iterate. You need to be able to change paths as you move forward. So related to understanding your users is this 2B. It's all about the people when we're talking about internal API programs and innovation. The success of what you're trying to do depends on people more than it depends on technology. That means getting people to use it, getting people to buy into it. There's a whole genre of what MBA is called change management that you can read about if this is something that you're really, really interested in. But basically, my takeaway from all of that is just to think about how what you're doing has an impact on people. Identifying your stakeholders and engaging them in the process, getting people to take some ownership in terms of contributing to what you're doing. If you can engender this sense of ownership, getting people to buy in and support your program will be a lot easier, and you stand a much greater chance of success. Again, build and maintain relationships. Actually go and talk to people. Get people to feel invested in what it is that you're trying to do. You'll have a much easier time understanding what it is that you're trying to do and the change you're trying to introduce. Another point that people overlook a lot of times is having respect for your corporate culture. And what I mean by that is not if you work in a staid, buttoned down, very corporate environment, that's exactly what you need to do, and then you have a boss coming to you saying, we need to be more like a startup. Well, that's fine, but you also need to understand the environment that you're operating in, but more so the environment that your coworkers are operating in. So figure out what you can do within that culture to make step changes, slowly evolve things, and work within some of these existing processes to make your program a success. And then, like I said, get buy-in and support. That part is really crucial. We tend to see a lot of internal API initiatives that are driven by a single person or a small group who don't really give that part of it enough credence, and it ends up, making people uncomfortable that they're trying to be, their role in an organization is trying to be changed. You're trying to take over some function, and those are the things that tend to fail. So the more buy-in and support, the more management sponsorship you can get as well, tends to help your internal program. Communication is vital, as I've said, be visible. And this means communicating with both groups and individuals and really creating some reasonable expectations around how you communicate with people and then living up to those. So, if someone sends you an email about the API program, be responsive. Let people know that you exist and that you're there to help and support them. Third point then is build for the win, and this is based a lot on what we tell companies with external developer programs. Developers are looking for things like make my life easier, make me a hero, make me be able to do something cool. And internally, if you're running an API program for innovation, your goals should be broadly similar. What is the tool that you're going to give someone that can make them a hero within the company? Is that going to be to launch a new product or do something different? So those are the things that you're going to get your wins from. An important point with this is respecting your users. Part of building your product is building out everything else to support your users around it. It's really strange. One thing we see in a lot of internal API programs when compared to external ones is people take a very different approach to things like support and documentation. And for some reason, people seem to think, well, this is an internal API. Support's not important. Documentation is not important. You know, it's because the user is internal, they don't take those things as seriously as if they were in an external-facing product, which really is a bad approach. You know, particularly as your users expand beyond your core team and into other parts of the business. You know, you need to be providing them with the right libraries, supporting the right languages. As Ronnie said, you know, providing those tools to help them utilize what it is you're trying to do. And again, you know, just because it's internal, don't overlook these things. And soliciting and incorporating feedback is an important part of this too. A lot of what we say about API programs and other developer resources is focused on this idea of developer value. And I put this up, it's a little different internally, but basically here, you know, the idea is the same. Like the value that you're providing is what people get out of this API that you're providing, minus what they put into it, what it takes for them to use it. And so we often look at it this way. You know, what is the marginal or additional future payoff that you're providing to someone who's using your API, minus the time it takes them to learn, the time to decide, the time to implement it, and all of these other things. Internally, it's largely the same. If you're providing a tool that has some payoff, but it's so difficult to use, whether that's because you're not providing the right SDKs and libraries, because you've overlooked support, because your documentation is bad, you know, all of these things subtract from that value equation and make it less likely that people are going to want to use your APIs and that your program is going to be a success. I'll be happy to share these slides, by the way. I see some people writing some things down, so don't worry if you miss something. Number 4, another thing that often gets overlooked with internal programs is the promotional aspect. You know, particularly with innovation, again, when you're trying to spread things throughout a company, people overlook this. And as I sort of titled this one, it's kind of as if you needed another role beyond setting up an API program, getting people to buy in and support it. Now you expect me to market it too? Of course, people need to use it. There's low-hanging fruit that you can grab, you know, in terms of some internal channels like newsletters and intranet that may vary from organization to organization. But I would also encourage you to cast a wide net here. Think beyond just the coders and developers in your company. You know, if you're trying to harness innovation or you know, create innovation, encourage it, move beyond, you know, just the pure people who can make API calls. Internal hack days can be great for this if those are a possibility, and getting people to work with other people in the organization, other people in functional roles. And this is where all of that work that you put into building relationships and getting stakeholders to engage with you and buy into your program turns around and really works to your benefit. The best way that you will have of promoting your internal APIs are your internal API users who are happy with them, who have done cool things with them, and tell other people about them. Just in the same way an external program tries to build champions and then utilize those to promote their resources, and an internal program needs to work the same way, because really it's that track record of successes and people talking about it that's going to continue to let it grow and to continue to let it to succeed. And this isn't something that is going to be easy from the outset, so I would encourage that you build this story over time. It can help to take an external mindset when you take this on, thinking, you know, if I'm promoting this to an outside user, say, you know, we were in an external program and I wanted to get outside developers to use this. What is it that I would want them to know about my APIs and my API program? What are the case studies or the success stories that I can point to internally? And then, you know, think about how you market this technically, or in terms of your developer marketing of providing, you know, clear resources that help internal users understand how the API works, what they need to do to use it, things that it can be used for, and so on. And then finally, my last point is be flexible and keep smiling. You're going to get this right the first time. Let's just disabuse ourselves of that right now, and that's okay. This is something that is not easy. It's not straightforward, and like I said, is going to vary from organization to organization. So it's very difficult for someone like me to come and say this is exactly what you need to do. I can sort of point you in the right direction, but there's so many variables within each context that it's really hard to get it right the first time, and that's okay. But don't paint yourself into a corner. Give yourself enough flexibility in how you set things up, in the technological decisions you make that lets you iterate. And part and parcel of that is starting small. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Again, we tend to see a lot of internal API initiatives driven by a single person, a team of 2 or 3 or 4 people, and trying to do so many different things that they just end up really doing a 25% job on 6 different things and end up with these APIs that are, halfway useful and really don't work for anyone. Program fails, things move on. Start small and get some early successes, some early wins to build from. Don't overwhelm yourself and your team. And again, don't get locked into a certain path that you then find out, 6 months down the line just is completely not right for your organization. One of the things that we hear about, from these internal innovation programs is we need to be more like a startup. So my takeaway from that would be, if you're going to be like a startup, embrace the pivot. That's a huge part of startup life, is you come to market with this fantastic idea, and then you figure out, it actually doesn't work. Well, if you want to act like a startup and be ready to pivot. I put this list of companies, have you heard of any of these? So who's heard of these startups? Tote? Anyone? Have you heard of Pinterest? Yeah, that's what Pinterest started at. It was a price comparison app. Didn't work so well. Odeo, anyone know Odeo? Well, you would. Odeo is what started Twitter. Odeo was a podcast directory, and that's what Twitter came out of. The point was, was like a community activist platform. But that's what Groupon came out of, when they figured their activism thing wasn't working, but they did a promotion for the pizza joint in the first floor of their building, and it went really well. So anyway, again, you're not going to get it right the first time. And if you're going to look at something like this lean startup methodology of build, measure, learn, I would sort of add the following point on that of adjust. And I think this is along similar lines of Ronnie's approach to design. Is really think about what you're doing, assess if it's working, be ready to pivot and reevaluate, rebuild, do things differently if it's not. So that is a quick 20 minutes or so on setting up an internal innovation program. Feel free to reach out if you've got more questions. And like I said, I'm happy to share my slides.